Hello everyone, welcome back to Mediverse Atlas. In today's video, we are going to talk about the transport of oxygen, and in this video only we will be also discussing about the oxygen dissociation curve, and it is a very important question. Actually, it is asked as an LAQ in our exams. Let us try to cover both the theory as well as the MCQ aspects. Now let us enter into the topic. See, we all know that the oxygen from the atmosphere is uptaken by the lungs. It transports oxygen to the tissues via blood. So what actually happens is oxygen, it enters into the blood, and the blood, it travels to the tissues and oxygen is supplied, right? Now this transport media varies. Oxygen can be transported in two forms. The first one is in the physically dissolved form, that is oxygen is dissolved in the plasma and transported, whereas in the second form, the combination of hemoglobin, oxygen, it combines with hemoglobin and it is transported to tissues. So let us talk about each and every transport form in detail. So the first one is in the physically dissolved form. Only 3% of the oxygen is transported in this form. Okay, but why? Because of the poor solubility of oxygen in the water content of plasma. We all know that plasma, the majority of the plasma is made up of water, right? So due to the presence of the majority of the water, oxygen cannot be dissolved properly in the plasma. So only 3% of the oxygen is transported by this form. And the second, the most important form is in the combination of the hemoglobin. 97% of the oxygen is transported in the combination of hemoglobin. So let us talk about this in detail. We all know that the oxygen, it combines with hemoglobin to form the oxyhemoglobin. Okay, and the process of formation of oxyhemoglobin is called as oxygenation. Okay, remember, it is oxygenation, not oxidation. Have you ever wondered why it is called as oxygenation, not oxidation? Let us try to clear that also. What exactly happens in oxidation? Basically, oxidation is addition of O2, right? So in oxidation, what happens is iron, it is converted from the ferrous form to ferric form, whereas in oxygenation, iron remains in its ferrous form only, and its binding is reversible. So oxygen also can be reversed, like it can also be uh, reversed. The binding of oxygen and hemoglobin can be reversed, so it is called as oxygenation. So there are two reasons why it is called as oxygenation: because of the reversible binding, as well as the iron remains in its ferrous state. Okay, now let us talk about this process of oxygenation. So what exactly happens is, when the concentration of oxygen is high, basically the concentration of oxygen is high at the level of lungs or at the level of alveoli. So this O2, it binds with hemoglobin in the blood, and it gets oxygenated to form the oxyhemoglobin. Now when there is low concentration at the tissue level, we all know that tissues, they obviously undergo some metabolic processes, so there will be decreased level of oxygen at the tissues. When there is decreased level of oxygen, this binding is reversible. That is, at the level of tissues, oxygen, it eliminates itself from the hemoglobin and supplied to the tissues. That is only written here. Okay, and one more important fact based question can be asked, MCQ. So oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin is 1.34 ml per gram. Remember, 1.34 ml per gram. That is, hemoglobin, one molecule of the hemoglobin, it carries or else 1 gram of hemoglobin, it carries 1.34 ml of oxygen. And this is also important point here. The O2 carrying capacity of blood is 20 ml of O2 per 100 ml of blood. See, 100 ml of blood, it is more in amount. It only carries 20 ml of oxygen. Why this variation? Like, if there is 100 ml of blood, why not 100 ml of saturation of O2? Because Hb is not fully saturated with oxygen. Like, all the molecules of hemoglobin are not saturated with oxygen in our blood. Only some percent of the hemoglobin is only saturated with the oxygen. That is only the reason that only 20 ml of oxygen carries 100 ml of blood. Okay, now let us talk about a very important concept now, the oxygen dissociation curve or the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Obviously from our lower classes we are studying this, but we'll be talking about this in detail here. Okay, we know that according to CBME curriculum there are some reasoning questions, various type of questions, the clinical based questions are there, so we need to focus much on concept. So what is oxygen dissociation curve, oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve? So it is the relationship between partial pressure of oxygen and the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. Okay, I know you have not understood anything, but you will be understanding, don't worry. Partial pressure of oxygen with the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. Now we are studying from our lower classes that oxygen dissociation curve is in sigmoid shape or S-shaped. But why? So there are two reasons. I'll be discussing them. So first reason is due to the allosteric property of hemoglobin. Now what exactly this allosteric property of hemoglobin? Hemoglobin, it exists in two states, T state, structurally basically T state and R state. Okay, T state, it has low affinity of O2, so there will be low affinity of O2 in T state, whereas in R state there will be high affinity to O2. Okay, hemoglobin has high affinity to O2 in R state. Now what happens due to this allosteric property? There will be conformational change, there will be conformational change in the structure of hemoglobin. So it converts from the T state to R state, which increases the affinity of oxygen. I hope you got the point. The first reason is due to the allosteric property of the hemoglobin. What is this allosteric property? Hemoglobin, it exists in T state and R state. T state has low affinity of oxygen, R state has high affinity of oxygen. What exactly happened? To increase the affinity of oxygen to of the hemoglobin towards oxygen, there will be a conformational change in the structure. Due to this conformational change, the hemoglobin, it converts from T state to R state, which increases the affinity of oxygen. So this is one reason, and another reason is due to the positive cooperativity. Now what exactly is this positive cooperativity? Let us try to understand. So suppose you are a group of friends, we have many ambitions, like we need to go to trip with friends, right? So you have planned to go to Goa. Okay, so this is the beach, imagine you have planned to go to Goa, but everyone is reluctant due to some reasons. Okay, now what happens is, in your group one friend initiates to go to Goa. Now by looking at him, you all also get inspired and go. This is only called as positive cooperativity. Okay, like if one friend cooperates, everyone will cooperate. That is the basic funda here. Okay, so now if one oxygen molecule binds to the hemoglobin, the other oxygen molecules also get inspired and they bind to the hemoglobin. So this is the positive cooperativity. Okay, now if I read here, you will get clarity now. So the first reason is due to the allosteric property of hemoglobin and positive cooperativity. What is allosteric property? It is the conformational change from T state, from the low affinity to high affinity state, that is R state. And the positive cooperativity, that is binding of oxygen molecules increases the affinity of hemoglobin for the next binding of O2 molecules. Okay, so this is the first reason, and the second reason is very simple, due to the he-in-him interaction. So there is a 100% chance that they may ask this in reasoning question, why it is in sigmoid shape. Okay, so better try to understand this and better remember. Now when we look at the graph or at the oxygen dissociation curve, we have discussed that it is in sigmoid shape. We have also discussed that why it is in sigmoid shape. Now it is plotted between partial pressure of oxygen and percentage saturation of hemoglobin, right? Now it has two phases, the steep phase as well as the plateau phase. The steep phase, it means the unloading of oxygen. Okay, unloading of oxygen. This oxygen, it eliminates itself from the hemoglobin. Okay, this is called as unloading. Now at what level this takes place? At the tissue level. When there is decreased concentration of O2, there will be unloading of oxygen, that is at the tissue level. Now what is this plateau phase? It indicates binding of oxygen, okay, at the level of alveoli or at the level of lungs. Okay, so these are the two phases which are represented in the oxygen dissociation curve. Okay, now a very important concept, the P50. What is this P50 exactly? So it is the level of partial pressure of oxygen at which 50% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. Just remember by heart this line. It is the level of partial pressure of oxygen at which 50% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. Now very simple, just remember this. Increased P50, it indicates decreased affinity of oxygen. Okay, and the curve is shifted to right. Let us talk about the shifting of curves also, don't worry. Okay, so increased P50, decreased affinity of oxygen, curve shift to right. When there is decreased P50, increased affinity of oxygen, and curve is shifted to left. Okay, now what are the factors affecting the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve? So there is left shift and right shift, right? Left shift, it indicates association of oxygen to the hemoglobin, that is binding of oxygen to the hemoglobin, that is the oxygenation. Left shift indicates oxygenation in simple words, and the right shift, it indicates dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin. Okay, now when there is let us talk about when there is a left shift or when there is right shift. There are some conditions, you just remember them. So left shift takes place in fetal blood. Okay, why? Because fetal blood has more affinity to oxygen than the adult blood. And when there is decreased PCO2, okay, or when there is decreased temperature, or when there is decreased 2,3 bpg, remember left shift everything decreased, okay, except PO2. Only PO2 will be increased here. Obviously if PCO2 is decreased, PO2 will be increased only, no, partial pressure of oxygen will be increased when there is decrease in partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Okay, don't confuse, just remember. Okay, just try to focus. So when there is left shift, when there is decreased concentration of CO2, when there is decreased temperature, when there is decreased 2,3 bpg, okay, or else in alkalosis, or carbon monoxide poisoning also there is left shift. It is very important MCQ. Carbon monoxide poisoning, which shift will be taking place? Left shift, remember. Okay, next right shift, opposite to this. Increase in PCO2, increase in temperature, increase in 2,3 bpg. Here alkalosis, no, it is acidosis here. So okay, so this is the basic funda. Now this 2,3 bpg, this 2,3 bisphosphoglycerate, when it is increased or decreased, 2,3 bpg levels are increased in, you can remember the mnemonic as Gita. Okay, G for growth hormone. When there is excess growth hormone, 2,3 bpg increased. When we do exercise, 2,3 bpg increased. Because of the thyroid hormone, 2,3 bpg will get increased. Because of the hypoxia and high altitude, 2,3 bpg can be increased. And anemia and androgens also, 2,3 bpg levels are increased. Now question they will be asking, what will be the effect of growth hormone on the oxygen dissociation curve? What will you tell? What will be the answer? Either it is right shift or left shift. Growth hormone, it increases the levels of 2,3 bpg. When 2,3 bpg levels are increased, there will be obviously right shift. Like this, you need to think like this. Okay, now one more small concept, Bohr effect. Okay, what is this Bohr effect? So decreased in hemoglobin affinity of oxygen when there is increased concentration of CO2, okay, which enhances further release of O2 to the tissues and curve shift to right. Okay, just remember, in Bohr effect, when there is Bohr effect, curve shifts to right. That is when there is increased concentration of partial pressure of carbon dioxide, there will be decreased concentration of partial pressure of oxygen, which makes the curve to shift right. This is the Bohr effect. Okay, nothing. So this is the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Mediverse Atlas. Don't forget to join our Telegram and Instagram channels. The links are in the description. If you have any doubts, please do directly DM us on Instagram, or else you can also comment. Thank you once again.